What happens when two of the most powerful women in entertainment clash on live television over a topic that hits closer to home than anyone expected? What unfolds next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about celebrity activism, royal scandals, and the price of speaking your truth on national TV. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below because this story gets absolutely wild. The atmosphere on the View set was electric as Angelina Jolie settled into the guest chair, her composed demeanor masking the storm brewing beneath the surface. The Oscar-winning actress had come to discuss her latest humanitarian work, but the conversation was about to take an unexpected turn that would dominate headlines for weeks to come. Whoopi Goldberg had just finished introducing the segment when Joy Behar leaned forward with a mischievous glint in her eye. "Angelina, we have to ask about the recent comments from Meghan Markle regarding celebrity activism. She suggested that some Hollywood figures use humanitarian work as a publicity stunt rather than genuine advocacy. Any thoughts on that?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Angelina's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. "Well, Joy, I think it's interesting when someone who has been in the public eye for such a short time feels qualified to judge the motivations of people who have dedicated decades to actual service." The audience stirred, sensing the tension building. Sunani host jumped in, "But surely you can understand her perspective. She's faced unprecedented scrutiny since joining the royal family." Angelina's laugh was dry, almost bitter. "Unprecedented scrutiny? I'm sorry, but stepping into a life of luxury and privilege while claiming victimhood is hardly unprecedented. What's unprecedented is abandoning royal duties while simultaneously trying to profit from the very title you claim has caused you so much pain." The co-hosts exchanged glances. This was not the diplomatic response they had expected from someone known for her measured public statements. Sarah N. tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "Both of you have been advocates for women's rights, though. Surely there's common ground there." Angelina shook her head slowly. "Advocacy requires sacrifice, Sarah. It means showing up when cameras aren't rolling, when there's no red carpet, when the work is thankless and dangerous. Real advocacy doesn't come with a Netflix deal and a mansion in Montecito." At the studio, the audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Alyssa Farah Griffin attempted to play devil's advocate. "But isn't it possible that different people can contribute to causes in different ways? Not everyone can travel to refugee camps." "You're absolutely right, Alyssa," Angelina replied, her voice gaining strength. "Not everyone can travel to refugee camps, but everyone can choose authenticity over performance. When I visit refugee camps, I don't bring a film crew. I don't time it with my latest movie release. I go because people are suffering, not because my publicist thinks it will improve my image." Whoopi tried to regain control of the conversation. "Now hold on, Angelina, that seems like a pretty direct attack on someone who isn't here to defend herself." Angelina turned to face Whoopi directly, her eyes blazing with an intensity that made the veteran host lean back slightly. "Whoopi, with all due respect, I've been silent for too long while watching the humanitarian community get dragged through the mud by someone who wouldn't last 5 minutes doing the real work. The refugees I work with, they don't care about your feelings getting hurt. They care about survival." The tension in the studio was palpable. Joy Behar never one to back down from controversy, but surely you have to admit that Meghan has faced unique challenges as a biracial woman entering the royal family. Angelina's expression hardened. "Joy, I've worked with women who have faced real discrimination, real oppression, women who have been sold into slavery, who have fled war zones with nothing but the clothes on their backs. I'm not diminishing anyone's personal struggles, but perspective matters. When you're complaining about not getting the tiara you wanted while children are starving in Yemen, perhaps it's time to reassess your priorities." The audience gasped audibly. Sarah N. looked uncomfortable as she tried to lighten the mood. "Angelina, you seem really passionate about this. Is there something specific that triggered these feelings?" Angelina paused, collecting her thoughts. "Sarah, what triggered these feelings was watching someone use real suffering as a backdrop for their personal narrative. When Meghan spoke about mental health struggles, which are absolutely valid and important, she did so while simultaneously promoting a lifestyle brand. When she talks about privacy, she does so in a multi-million-dollar interview watched by millions. The disconnect is staggering," Sunani host interjected. But couldn't you argue that her platform allows her to reach more people with important messages about mental health and social justice? Sunny, let me tell you about platform and reach, Angelina replied, her voice taking on a sharper edge. When I became a UN Goodwill Ambassador, I didn't demand a crown or a title. I didn't negotiate a deal where I got to keep the perks while abandoning the responsibilities. I learned the issues, I studied the problems, and I put in the work. Real advocacy isn't about reach. It's about depth. The co-hosts were clearly struggling to manage the explosive nature of the conversation. Alyssa tried once more to find middle ground. Don't you think there's room for different approaches to advocacy and public service? Angelina's response was swift and cutting. Alyssa, there's a difference between different approaches and performative activism. When your approach to women's rights includes throwing your sister-in-law under the bus in a tell-all interview. When your approach to mental health awareness includes publicly attacking your family while they're grieving. That's not advocacy, that's exploitation. The studio fell silent again. Whoopi looked directly into the camera, clearly trying to wrap up the segment before it spiraled further out of control. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll continue this conversation with Angelina Jolie. As the cameras cut to commercial, the tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. The audience sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. Angelina sat perfectly still, her composure intact, despite having just delivered what many would consider a devastating critique. The co-hosts huddled together, whispering urgently about how to handle the remainder of the interview. When the cameras rolled again, Whoopi's expression was serious. We're back with Angelina Jolie, and before the break, we were having a very frank discussion about celebrity activism and public service. Angelina, do you want to clarify any of your previous statements? Angelina looked directly into the camera, her voice steady and unwavering. Whoopi, I don't think clarification is necessary. I think honesty is necessary. The humanitarian community has watched in dismay as real issues have been co-opted for personal gain. When someone uses their platform to promote themselves rather than the causes they claim to champion, it does damage to the very people they claim to help. Joy Behar, emboldened by the commercial break, jumped back in. But Angelina, don't you think you're being a bit harsh? Everyone starts somewhere in their activism journey. The question would prove to be the spark that ignited an even bigger explosion. Angelina's eyes flashed with something that made the entire panel shift uncomfortably in their seats. Joy, that's exactly the problem. Everyone wants to give participation trophies for activism. Now, this isn't kindergarten soccer where everyone gets a medal for showing up. When you're dealing with human rights violations, when you're working with victims of genocide, when you're trying to save actual lives, there's no room for amateur hour. The audience was completely captivated, many pulling out their phones to record what was quickly becoming television gold. Sarah N. attempted to redirect, but surely experience has to start somewhere, right? Sarah, you're absolutely right, Angelina replied, her voice gaining momentum. Experience does start somewhere. Mine started with actually visiting refugee camps, not photo opportunities. It started with learning languages so I could speak directly to the people I was trying to help. It started with understanding that this work isn't about me, it's about them. When your activism starts with a complaint about not getting enough diamonds in your tiara, you've already lost the plot. Sunani host looked visibly uncomfortable, but pressed on. Angelina, you're clearly referring to specific incidents. Don't you think it's unfair to attack someone who isn't here to defend herself? Angelina turned to Sunny with laser focus. Sunny, she's had multiple platforms to defend herself. She's had primetime interviews, podcast deals, and Netflix series. What she hasn't had is accountability. When you publicly accuse an entire family of racism on international television, when you claim an institution is failing you while simultaneously profiting from that same institution, someone needs to point out the hypocrisy. The studio audience was hanging on every word, some nodding in agreement, others looking shocked by the directness of the attack. Alyssa Farah Griffin tried to play mediator. But isn't it possible that both things can be true? That someone can face real challenges while also having privilege? Alyssa, of course, both things can be true, Angelina acknowledged, but her tone remained sharp. The difference is in how you handle that privilege. When I divorced Brad Pitt, I didn't go on television to air our private business. When I faced custody battles, I didn't weaponize my children's trauma for public sympathy. Privacy isn't something you claim to want while simultaneously selling your story to the highest bidder. Whoopi tried to regain control of the increasingly heated conversation. Now, Angelina, that's a pretty personal comparison. Whoopi, everything about this conversation is personal. Angelina shot back, her composure cracking slightly to reveal raw emotion underneath. When someone uses humanitarian work as a prop for their personal narrative, it becomes personal to everyone who has dedicated their lives to this work. When someone claims to be a voice for the voiceless while drowning out actual victims with their own complaints, it becomes personal. Joy Behar, sensing the conversation was reaching a boiling point, decided to push further. But Angelina, don't you think there's some jealousy here? Meghan got the fairy tale wedding, the prince, the global attention. The question hung in the air like a live grenade. Angelina's laugh was sharp and humorless. Joy, clear about something. I've been to war zones. I've held children who have been orphaned by violence. I've seen real suffering, real injustice, real oppression. The idea that I would be jealous of someone who abandoned their duties to make money off their title is not just insulting, it's absurd. The audience stirred, some gasping at the directness of the response. Sarah N. looked genuinely concerned about the direction of the conversation. Angelina, you seem really angry about this. Is there something deeper going on here? Angelina paused, taking a deep breath before responding. Sarah, what's going on here is that I've watched someone turn real issues into performance art. Mental health awareness is crucial, but not when it's packaged with a lifestyle brand. Racial justice is vital, but not when it's used as a shield against legitimate criticism. Women's empowerment is essential, but not when it comes at the expense of other women. Sunani host jumped in, but surely you can understand the unique position she was in, trying to navigate royal protocol while maintaining her identity. Sunny, I understand difficult positions, Angelina replied, her voice growing more intense. I understand what it means to be scrutinized, to be criticized, to have your every move analyzed, but I also understand what it means to put the work before the recognition, to put the cause before the celebrity. When your solution to royal protocol is to abandon your responsibilities while keeping your titles, you're not breaking barriers, you're breaking promises. The co-hosts were clearly struggling to maintain control of the interview. Alyssa tried once more to find common ground. But don't you think that speaking out about mental health struggles, regardless of the circumstances, can help other people? Angelina's response was swift and cutting. Alyssa, speaking out about mental health struggles is important, but timing matters. Context matters. When you're promoting a mental health initiative while simultaneously attacking your family members who are grieving, when you're talking about compassion while showing none to the people who welcomed you into their family, the message gets lost in the hypocrisy. The audience was completely silent now, processing the full weight of what they were witnessing. Whoopi looked directly at Angelina, her expression serious. Angelina, these are some very strong accusations. Are you prepared to stand behind them? Angelina met Whoopi's gaze without flinching. Whoopi, I've spent 20 years building credibility in the humanitarian community. I've worked with governments, with UN agencies, with grassroots organizations. I've put my money where my mouth is. I've put my safety on the line. I've put my family's privacy at risk for causes I believe in. Yes, I'm prepared to stand behind my words because my actions have already spoken louder than any interview ever could. Joy Behar, never one to back down from controversy, pushed even further. But Angelina, aren't you concerned that this kind of public criticism could damage your own reputation? Angelina's smile was cold. Joy, my reputation isn't built on victim narratives or tell-all interviews. It's built on results. The women I've helped escape human trafficking don't care about my reputation. The refugees I've worked with don't care about my image. They care about action, not performance. The tension in the studio was reaching a breaking point. Sarah N. looked genuinely worried about where the conversation was heading. Angelina, do you think there's any path forward for healing these divisions? Sarah, healing requires acknowledgement. Angelina replied, her voice taking on a prophetic quality. It requires admitting when you've used real suffering for personal gain. It requires recognizing that activism isn't about building your brand. It's about serving others. Until that happens, until there's real accountability, the division will continue because the damage to legitimate humanitarian work will continue. Sunani host made one last attempt at diplomacy, but surely there's room for forgiveness, for growth, for learning from mistakes. Angelina's final response of the segment was devastating in its simplicity. Sunny, forgiveness requires remorse. Growth requires humility. Learning requires listening. When someone continues to profit from the very behaviors they claim to regret. When they continue to play victim while victimizing others. When they continue to demand privacy while selling their story. What exactly are we supposed to forgive? The cameras cut to commercial break, but the damage was done. Social media was already exploding with clips and reactions. The audience sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. Angelina sat perfectly composed, having delivered what many would consider a masterclass in controlled fury. The co-hosts huddled together, clearly debating how to handle the final segment of what had become the most explosive interview in The View's recent history. When the cameras prepared to roll again, everyone in the studio knew they were about to witness something unprecedented. As the cameras rolled for the final segment, Whoopi's expression was grave. "We're back with Angelina Jolie. And clearly, this conversation has taken some unexpected turns. Angelina, before we wrap up, is there anything you want to say directly to Meghan Markle?" The question electrified the studio. Angelina looked directly into the camera, her voice steady but filled with unmistakable authority. "If Meghan is watching this, I want her to know that the humanitarian community sees through performance activism. We see through manufactured crises. We see through the exploitation of real issues for personal gain. The refugees I work with, the women I advocate for, they deserve better than to be used as props in someone's personal narrative." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. Joy Behar, sensing this was television gold, pressed further. "It's a pretty direct message. Do you think she respond?" Angelina's laugh was sharp. "Joy, I'm sure she respond. She always does. But here's the difference between us. I respond with action, not interviews. When I'm criticized, I go back to the field and work harder. When she's criticized, she books another television appearance to explain why everyone else is wrong." Sarah N. looked genuinely concerned about the escalation. "Angelina, don't you worry that this kind of public confrontation could overshadow the important work you're trying to highlight?" "Sarah, that's exactly the point," Angelina replied, her voice gaining strength. "The work should never be overshadowed by the worker. The cause should never be secondary to the celebrity. When someone makes themselves the story instead of the people they claim to help, they've already failed as an advocate." Sunani host attempted to play devil's advocate one final time, but couldn't you argue that visibility and celebrity can bring more attention to important causes? Angelina's response was swift and devastating. "Sunny, visibility without substance is just noise. Celebrity without sacrifice is just vanity. When your advocacy comes with a price tag, when your compassion comes with conditions, when your service comes with self-promotion, you're not helping anyone but yourself." The studio atmosphere was electric with tension. Alyssa Farah Griffin made one last attempt at diplomacy. "Angelina, what would you say to people who think this criticism is too harsh?" Angelina turned to face Alyssa directly, her eyes blazing with conviction. "Alyssa, I would say that gentle criticism has failed. Diplomatic responses have failed. The humanitarian community has been polite for too long while watching our work get diminished by someone who treats real suffering like a networking opportunity. Sometimes harsh truth is the only thing that cuts through the noise." Whoopi tried to steer the conversation toward closure. "Angelina, what do you hope comes from this conversation?" "Whoopi, I hope people start demanding authenticity from their advocates." Angelina replied, her voice taking on an almost evangelical quality. "I hope they start asking hard questions about motivations. I hope they start distinguishing between people who serve causes and people who use causes to serve themselves. Most importantly, I hope they start focusing on the actual issues instead of the personalities claiming to represent them." Joy Behar, never one to let a moment pass, jumped in with a final provocative question. "Angelina, if Meghan Markle called you right now and asked to work together on a humanitarian project, what would you say?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Angelina's response was immediate and unflinching. "Joy, I would say that real humanitarian work isn't about photo opportunities or press releases. It's about showing up when no one is watching, when there's no credit to be claimed, when the work is dirty and dangerous and thankless. If she wants to do that kind of work, she knows where to find me. But if she wants to use humanitarian work as a platform for her personal brand, she can find someone else." The audience gasped at the directness of the response. Sarah N. looked almost stunned. "That's quite a gauntlet you've thrown down there." "Sarah, it's not a gauntlet," Angelina replied calmly. "It's a standard. The same standard I hold myself to. The same standard I hold every advocate to. The refugees I work with don't care about your feelings. They care about results. The women I advocate for don't care about your image. They care about action. If you can't meet that standard, you have no business claiming to speak for them." Sunani host made one final attempt to soften the blow. "But surely everyone deserves a chance to grow and learn in their advocacy journey." Angelina's final response was perhaps the most devastating of the entire interview. When someone continues to make the same mistakes, when they continue to center themselves in stories that aren't about them, when they continue to profit from the very behaviors they claim to regret, at what point do we stop calling it growth and start calling it what it is, which is exploitation? The studio fell completely silent. The weight of what had just transpired was settling over everyone present. Whoopi looked directly into the camera, clearly trying to wrap up what had become the most explosive interview in recent television history. "We want to thank Angelina Jolie for what has certainly been one of the most candid conversations we've had on The View." "Angelina, any final thoughts?" Angelina looked directly into the camera one last time, her voice steady and unwavering. "My final thought is this. Real advocacy isn't about building your brand. It's about serving others. It's not about getting credit. It's about creating change. It's not about telling your story. It's about amplifying the voices of those who truly need to be heard. To anyone watching who wants to make a real difference in the world, I encourage you to look beyond the celebrity activists and find the people doing the actual work. Support them, learn from them, and most importantly, join them in the field where the real work happens." The cameras cut to commercial, but the damage was done. Social media was already exploding with clips, reactions, and hot takes. The audience sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. Angelina sat perfectly composed, having delivered what many would consider a masterclass in controlled destruction. The co-hosts looked shell-shocked, clearly aware that they had just presided over television history. As the credits rolled, everyone in the studio knew they had witnessed something unprecedented. The interview would dominate headlines for weeks, spark countless debates about celebrity activism, and forever change how people viewed both women involved. Angelina Jolie had not just criticized Meghan Markle, she had systematically dismantled the entire concept of performance activism in the most public way possible. The aftermath would be swift and brutal. Social media would explode with reactions ranging from fierce support to outraged criticism. News outlets would dissect every word, every gesture, every implication. Celebrity friends would be forced to choose sides. The humanitarian community would be divided between those who applauded the honesty and those who condemned the approach. But in that moment, as the studio lights dimmed and the audience slowly filed out, one thing was crystal clear. Angelina Jolie had said exactly what she came to say, and she had said it with a precision and power that left no room for misinterpretation. The gauntlet hadn't just been thrown down. It had been delivered with the force of a sledgehammer, and the reverberations would be felt for years to come. The View had witnessed many heated exchanges over the years, but nothing quite like this. This wasn't just a disagreement between celebrities, this was a fundamental challenge to the entire culture of celebrity activism. Delivered by someone with the credentials and conviction to make it stick. What do you think? Did Angelina Jolie go too far, or was this the reality check that celebrity activism needed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to subscribe for more explosive celebrity stories that you won't see anywhere.